If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about City Hall getting called out for its very confusing rules on tree removal. Plus, we're going to dive into our listener mailbag and hear your thoughts on Portland's coolest neighborhood and our very complicated tipping culture. Joining me on this week's Midweek News Roundup is our very own producer, Giulia Fiaoni. It's Wednesday, October 2nd. I'm John Notarianni in for Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Hello, and welcome to the Midweek Microdose of News. It's a chance for us to dig into some of the stories you might have missed from the last week. It's also a chance for us to hear from you as we dig into our listener mailbag. Julia, good morning.
Good morning.
How are the Swifts that have migrated to your very cool neighborhood, I hear?
I'm so glad you asked. They were popping last night. If you haven't heard yet, this is kind of a big deal. So the Swifts that were originally hanging out at Chapman Elementary School in Northwest seem to have migrated over to Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Cathedral on Gleason and 31st in Northeast. I don't know if they're for sure all of the same birds, but that's the lore. And there were so many there last night because at this church, they also have a chimney and space for viewing. And I guess there aren't any predators, which was happening at Chapman. I heard that there was some sort of a hawk or a larger bird hanging out near the chimney, which kind of deterred the birds from going there. I don't know if that was the only thing, but they are here and they seem to be having a nice time at their new chimney.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that the weekend they decided to migrate was the weekend before we aired my interview about the Swifts at Chapman. So the prevailing theory is that somehow I convinced them all to move away from Chapman Elementary by doing an interview about them. So
yeah,
sorry to everyone who's hoping to see them at Chapman. They are elsewhere. Julia, I don't know if you saw in our inbox this morning, we also had a message from Jack who sent a video of them also at Harrison.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. There's like a closed down Mormon temple there. And he sent us a video of the Swifts swarming there. So thanks for sending that in, Jack. Yeah, they're all over the east side right now.
Oh my gosh, they must just be trying out new spaces, trying to see which one's the right fit.
Yeah, going on tour around Portland.
Yeah.
Well, before we jump into today's conversation, I wanted to take a quick moment and just welcome new listeners to the show and thank everyone who's become a member so far this week, because this is the third day of our CityCast Portland membership drive. And, you know, our goal on the show every day is to sort of get into what really makes Portland tick. And members are a big part of that. You guys, the listeners, you know, we like to bring you the most compelling stories, interesting voices, and insider recommendations about what's going on around the city. So you can make the most of living in Portland and also hopefully kind of make this city better, you know?
Yeah, I love that, John. We have such a unique job in producing a daily podcast and newsletter. And I think it's something we all really love because of how much we love Portland. And with our fall campaign happening this week, I think it's a great time just to remind people why we do what we do, but also how we do it. And truthfully, our work wouldn't be possible without member support.
Yeah, totally. You know, all of your membership support not only keeps us in business, thank you for that, but it also helps the show to grow and evolve and to just better serve our listeners. So if you feel like you've ever gotten something valuable from CityCast Portland, you know, whether that is a new perspective on something that's going on in the city or a great recommendation that you used for your weekend, will you please become a member today? Your support is really just what keeps us going, and it means the world to us.
Totally. You can join right now by heading to membership.citycast.fm. I'll say that again. That's membership.citycast.fm. Thank you so much to all of our current members and to those who are thinking of joining us. We really wouldn't be here without you.
Seriously, thank you so much. All right, Julia, let's jump into the show. What story are you looking at today?
All right, we're talking about trees.
Trees.
So my segment this morning comes from some reporting by Austin De Dios at the Oregonian. And they're talking about how Portland's auditor's office called out City Hall last week for their, quote, confusing and poorly written code on tree removal, which I don't know about you, John, that was not a surprise to hear.
No, not at all.
And it sounds like the problem is mostly lying with the fact that our current tree removal code places just too much of a burden on homeowners. And I'll give you an example. De Dios reported that the auditor's office pointed out that city officials refused to pay to remove a tree adjacent to a homeowner's property in Southwest, which cost around $5,000. And I want to emphasize the city asked the homeowner to remove the tree due to safety risks, not the other way around, even though the tree was located many feet behind the property. But then, only months later, they were willing to pay to remove Portland's oldest elm tree on land owned by a real estate investment company for safety reasons as well, which cost around $15,000. And the only reason why the city covered it was because it's a heritage tree due to its age and general significance. So lots of case-by-case discrepancy there already. So that happened, but the thing is, it gets even more complicated when homeowners request to remove trees themselves. They generally need a permit to remove most trees on private property and all trees in the area between the property line and the sidewalk, so those street trees. And back in 2017, there were efforts from City Council to try to make all trees on public right-of-ways the property owner's responsibility, but it didn't pass, so that's why the code still follows more of a case-by-case protocol. But all that being said, regarding the example I mentioned earlier, Ombudsman officials are suggesting the city should take on more responsibility for street tree maintenance generally and cover the cost of removal for the homeowner in this case, which is something that the City Parks and Recreation Urban Forestry Division is actually on board with, which I think is pretty cool.
That's the wildest part of this. The forestry department's like, works for us. Let's do it. Come on.
Like, let's just figure this out. But anyway, so we saw the cracks of the system a lot last winter during those massive ice storms when trees were falling on people's homes. Nearly 700 trees fell during that storm season, many of them street trees. And even in those dire circumstances when trees were falling on homes, there was a lack of direction from City Hall on whether permits were required and whose responsibility the cost of removal was, which I found pretty ridiculous. There were some cases where families had a whole ass tree fallen on the middle of their home and just in a stalemate as to what they could do about it legally because of how the city was acting. I'm sure you remember that, John.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it on the show back in January.
Yeah.
I feel like a fair amount. I feel like we talked about it a few times. And the story that comes to my mind was, I think it was a Willamette Week story about a family that had requested to chop down a Doug fir, and the city denied it for whatever reason, denied a permit, and then the tree just ended up falling on the house. So they tried to do it. They saw this danger coming and weren't able to do anything about it. Yeah, I mean, this feels like exactly the type of thing that this auditor's office that has really been kind of kicking ass this year should be looking at, just to shine a big spotlight on it and be like, hey, Portland, this makes no sense. And there's like departments in the city that are willing to change it. We just need to get approval from city council to make it happen.
Yeah. I really do think now is the time. I would hope that something could be figured out before this upcoming winter season is in full force. I feel like that could save a lot of homes from being pretty severely damaged. So fingers crossed that something gets done before then.
Yeah. Julia, this story coming up now is especially funny to me because my mom has actually been going through this right now.
Oh, no.
In the same way. I mean, she doesn't live in Portland, but yeah, she has a tree in her yard that needs to come down. And she got an arborist to come out who actually talked her through how to get the city to pay for it.
Oh.
She was willing to pay for it herself because she didn't want this tree to crash on her house. But this arborist came out and was like, no. I think you can get the city on this one. Here's how you do it.
It feels like a mob deal at that point. We're just talking about trees, people.
Yeah, somebody has to take down this tree. So that is like, I guess, my hot tip. Find a wheeling and dealing arborist that can walk you through how to get the city to take down your tree if that's something that you need to have happen.
Good stuff.
Well, Giulia, thanks for breaking that down for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, why don't we take a quick break and then let's dig into the listener mailbag.
Woohoo.
If you're a home DIYer like me, you might have some leftover paint gathering dust in your basement. But I'm happy to share that Paint Care has 3 simple rules for painting smarter, reducing waste, and helping you get back some of that much-needed storage space. First, buy the right amount of paint for the job. Paint Care has 6 questions to ask yourself when buying paint that can help ensure you have enough while minimizing waste. Second, you use up what's left. Before you break out the paintbrush and tape, see if you have any leftover paint that can save you a trip to the store. Paint Care's website also offers helpful tips for storing paint properly so it lasts for years. And third, if you still have paint, stain, or varnish left over, Paint Care makes it easy to recycle it with convenient drop-off locations as close as your local hardware store. And you can go learn more at paintcare.org/3simplerules. The November 5th election is coming up sooner than you think, and City Club of Portland is here to help you learn about the local candidates and issues. On Tuesday, October 8th, join City Club at the First Congregational Church in downtown Portland for a mayoral candidate forum featuring Keith Wilson, Carmen Rubio, Lee Vostas, Mingus Maps, and Renee Gonzalez. This event is totally free, but space is limited, so registration is encouraged to save your seat and submit questions for the candidates. You can find that link at pdxcityclub.org/2024. And if you can't make it in person, you can watch recordings of this and other candidate forums at pdxcityclub.org/2024.
All right, Giulia, we've heard a lot from listeners this week. Our mailbox has been just completely full, which is awesome. Thank you so much to everybody who's reached out.
Oh, yeah.
The first story I want to talk about, though, is about this neighborhood in Portland named Kerns, which is one of the coolest neighborhoods in the world. So this is according to, Time Out magazine, right?
Uh-huh.
They made a list of what they say are the 38 coolest neighborhoods in the world. And Kerns in Portland is at number 5, the 5th coolest neighborhood on the planet. I had to actually go and look at the barriers of where Kerns is, because I'm sort of like, wait, Kerns? Of all the neighborhoods, Kerns? So basically this is northeast Portland, south of 84 down to Burnside, more or less. And then it goes out to around 32nd, 33rd area. Also, fun fact about Kerns, isn't that where you live, Giulia?
That's the funnest fact. You're correct.
How does it feel living in one of the coolest neighborhoods in the world?
It's always felt great. Honestly, though, this is kind of ridiculous, I must say.
As a resident of Kerns, what's your take?
Okay, I love Kerns. I feel like for so many reasons. First being how it is centrally located. I must say, Holman's is in the Kerns neighborhood. And that is actually the center point of Portland. So it gives you an idea of just how central the neighborhood is generally, which is fabulous. I feel like that's what leads people to feel like Portland is a walkable city, is a bikeable city, where you're interconnected in so many ways to so many different types of people and neighborhoods. It's so good. But that being said, within the neighborhood, there are so many places that I love so much. But what kills me is that in this article that you mentioned from Time Out, they didn't list any of them. They listed all of these kind of random spots or not the best option of all the different categories. They picked a coffee shop that I've never even heard of when there's an obvious pick in our neighborhood that's an iconic spot that's really unique, has really great coffee and really interesting environment.
Which spot?
Kopi. But Kopi is really special to the neighborhood. And they picked this other random spot that kind of looks pretty stale. I'm not going to mention it. You can look if you want.
They picked a few good places. They pointed out Olympia Provisions, Laurelhurst Theater, Guero.
Yes, but Olympia Provisions
They pointed out your Holmans. They gave you your Holmans, Julia.
They pointed out Olympia Provisions because it was in reference to Providar Foods, which is a really nice grocery store. But I don't think it's like what makes Kerns Kerns. It's too much of like a pinkies up environment to really be like the identity of the neighborhood. I'm getting really into the specifics of this.
Well, Julia, we did get a number of emails sort of backing this pick.
I know.
As the Kerns resident expert, you want to like walk us through some of the things that listeners have been saying about Kerns?
Yes. So I will read some of this hype. This one's from a newsletter reader, Tio. No, you're right about Kerns being the coolest neighborhood. I'm not biased, in parentheses. And then also from Trina, another newsletter reader. I used to live in Kerns, but now live in South Tabor. As much as I love my neighborhood, I really miss Kerns. Such beautiful houses to see on neighborhood walks that lead you to an incredible selection of restaurants, coffee shops, and cafes. Kerns is definitely the coolest in my opinion. And I agree with all of those things. I really do think it has to be one of the coolest neighborhoods in Portland, but for reasons separate of what they pointed out in the article. And I cannot believe the fact that it's ranked on a list of cities that is global and not just within Portland.
You realize this is the most hipster argument ever made, Julia, where you're like,
know.
it is the coolest, but it's cooler for these other things that are so cool that you don't even know about.
I just have to say, there's a perfume shop listed in this article, and just imagining the type of person that will just specifically seek out a perfume shop in a neighborhood to go shopping there is strange to me. It just doesn't feel like the neighbors that I know in this area.
Yeah.
So I think they got it wrong, but I'm happy to see the shout out is my take. John, I'm taking up a lot of space here. How do you feel?
I mean, like I said, I had to look up to figure out exactly the borders of Kerns.
Yeah.
That's my take. We heard from a lot of people on this, actually. And I think we got the largest volume of like 1- and 2-word emails ever to the show. Natalia wrote in and just said, "Hi, Montevilla." Daniel wrote in and just said, "Concordia."
Uh-huh.
Barbara wrote in and said, "Definitely Peacock Lane is the coolest." A lot of shout outs in our inbox. But I think that my favorite of all of them is Stephen with, I think, the most Portland answer of all. This is what Stephen said. In the 90s and the aughts, Portland was cool. Not anymore. Look around at the tents and trash and the brewery restaurants that are closed. You're too young to remember. Talk to older people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is like the coolest take of all, is that it used to be cooler.
That is even more hipster than what I've been ranting about this entire time.
Oh my God.
I'm glad to see Kerns shouted out, though. I will say there are so many times when I'm speaking with friends who live in Portland, and I'll mention I live in Kerns, and they're like, who? And I'm like, Kerns. And then I always have to say, next to the Hollywood district.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
Well, congratulations on the coolest neighborhood in America, Julia. We're also jealous.
I will take my award begrudgingly, but thank you.
So we also had a huge amount of mail on a segment we did a week ago on tipping. This is one I sat out on. You, Claudia, and Brian sat down basically trying to figure out how to make sense of like what the new rules of tipping are in Portland. And we heard from so many people on this, and they had a lot to say about it.
Yeah. So this one's from listener Brian, not Brian who was on the episode. Quote, firstly, any one service industry professional that touches you as a part of their job gets a bigger tip. So hairstylist, massage therapist, the girl at the nail salon, that sort of thing gets 20% at a bare minimum, and more like 25 to 30% tip. Now, if it is more a medical procedure than service industry, I'd expect them to get paid enough that tipping would be in poor taste. So no to the dental hygienist or the therapist in Brian's story about his wife. Come on. If insurance is paying for it, no tip. Secondly, you should always overtip at breakfast or brunch. Those poor servers have to get up at the crack of dawn. There is so much side work associated with breakfast, the little creamers to fill and the ramekins of butter and jam and syrup, brewing coffee, etc. Which brings me to the next part. So much sticky stuff. You want to work a job where you get sticky? Fuck that. Give them money. I love this comment.
I love this comment too. Julia, we both spent time in the service industry. I have worked brunch before. It is just like the tyranny of so many refillable glasses because everyone's so thirsty. They need to have their water refilled. They need to have their coffee refilled. They probably have a Bloody Mary and an orange juice. There's just so many glasses that are constantly getting empty. Yes.
Yeah.
Tip your brunch server. They are saving your life.
Yes. He also popped off about baristas and coffee servers generally and how it is a much tougher job than people assume for so many reasons. So if you're able, think about them a little bit more when you're tipping, which is something I mentioned in the episode. I am biased because I worked in that specific industry myself. But thanks, Brian, for writing in.
Yeah. Like I said, we heard from a lot of people on this. Christina wrote in, who is a server and a bartender, has been for 15 years, has also worked in the kitchen and as a barista. They say they're now a bartender at a nice Italian restaurant downtown and basically pointed out how it might be difficult for restaurants to sort of cover the cost if they were to go tip-free in some of these higher-end places. Here's the quote. I make an average of $27 an hour, probably slightly more with cash tips, and of that, my employer pays $15.75 an hour. So in order to bridge that gap between what he's paying me and what I'm making now, he would have to fork over an additional $11 an hour. I know for a fact he cannot afford to do that. I think especially in like high-end places, that's super true. You know, even if it's an expensive meal, like the profit margins can be so slim that just like baking it into the price of the dish is going to be really, really difficult for him.
Yeah.
Also, Christina pointed out how like tipping is often pooled by the people who work in the restaurant and that it creates what she describes it as a social ritual that binds us all together. We know we are helping each other out, so we work harder because we know the whole thing is interconnected. And I think that that's a part of it that like might not be super visible to customers, but it's also pretty important.
Absolutely, especially in a fine dining environment. I also worked as a server in that type of a space, and each piece already outside of the tip pooling is so interconnected, and there's a lot of pressure put on each other, but also a lot of encouragement towards each other to get it right and to have that incentive that we're all working to get a little bit more and to have a bit more of a stable financial situation is pretty key. I wish it was different, but it is just, it's true. What they're saying is true.
Totally.
Well, here's another one from listener KJ. Quote, years ago while working in Fiji, I took clients to dinner at the finest restaurant. The venue was beautiful, the food great, and the service impeccable. When I paid, I included a $100 tip. The maitre d' pulled me aside and said they could not accept the tip. I argued that the service was exceptional, times were tough, etc. His response was, quote, we expect excellent service from each of our employees, and unlike in your country, we pay our employees. We do not expect our customers to. End quote. Tipping in the U.S. is beyond crazy.
Oh, shade from Fiji.
Shade from Fiji and from KJ.
Well, I got one more. So this one is from Karina, and I thought that this was an interesting point. It's important to remember that the cashier did not set up their POS. That's like the point of sale computer where you pay.
Yeah.
So just because the screen asks for your tip amount, it's not necessarily expected by the person you're interacting with. You can select 0 when that is appropriate. An example, my husband works at a wine bar that sells bottles. He is not expecting you to tip when you buy a bottle, but it's the same screen that you would see if you spent 2 hours with him drinking flights, eating, and asking questions about the wine. This is more of a POS issue than a restaurant culture issue.
Yeah.
Which I think doesn't really clarify things for people, but is like, you know, the gut advice there is like, just pay attention to what you're doing and like what your interaction is. And like if somebody's really going above and beyond, and like working hard to make you feel comfortable, you should tip them.
Yeah, and also don't feel frustrated with the person who's selling you something if that tip screen comes up because it is automated. That was another thing that came up in the conversation with Brian and Claudia. Brian had expressed that frustration because of the way a certain POS system was set up and what it had suggested. But it's good inside information to know that it's not customized to every transaction. It's typically the same thing every time. So you can
Yeah.
feel a little bit less guilty saying no if you do feel like that's necessary.
Just slow down, take a breath.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we have clarified this for anyone or just made it even more complicated. But yeah, thanks for walking through this with me, Julia. And thank you for everybody who wrote in.
Yeah.
We really heard from so many people on this. We could have done a whole nother episode just from all the comments that we got. So thanks for reaching out and sharing your thoughts, everyone. And if you ever do want to let us know what you think about an episode or have some ideas, just hit us up, portland@citycast.fm. We do read and consider everything that comes in, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, Julia. Well, thanks for walking through the stories of the day with me. Always a treat to have you on the show.
Thanks, John.
And a reminder, our fall membership campaign is currently underway. Become a CityCast Portland member right now. You can go to membership.citycast.fm right now to find out about the perks and to join. If you're already a member, thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. That's all for us today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you left us a rating or a review or told a friend about it. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.